I really hope it doesn't take a pandemic for email counselling to also kind of surge and become bigger, because it did overnight with video call, and it will with email counselling, it certainly will. It will take a little bit of time, I think, for that stigma to reduce and the kind of wondering and questioning and this fear of change in the counselling community. With clients, it's already there. But counsellors, we need to listen to that and be more ready to, like, how can we make our spaces more accessible, more flexible for both clients and for us.
Welcome to the Good Enough Counsellors podcast, where today I've invited Chloe Foster, who uses the pronouns they, she, to tell us all about their work as a therapist specialising in helping people from the LGBTQ community. Chloe has also developed additional income streams and is going to share more about how to use email counselling and how that option works for clients and therapists alike. Chloe first started working with me back in 2020. They'd already been delivering CPD training for another organisation, but wanted to branch out on their own. They successfully delivered a number of workshops for therapists on LGBTQ subjects, where they're known for making their training interactive and engaging. Their training has been approved and accredited by NCPS, and they've now developed further training for therapists on how to use email counselling in their practice. So welcome, Chloe.
Oh, thank you for having me. Wow, what an introduction.
So, Chloe, let's start at the beginning. I just want to let people get to know you a little bit, because you are known for working with the LGBTQ niche. Mm-hmm. And I know from our conversations in the past, when we first, our very first conversation, this had been a niche that you'd been working with really ever since you started working in private practice. But I wondered what that was like for you. How did you go about choosing your niche? And what did it feel like to really stick your neck out and choose that LGBTQ niche?
Oh, great question. Yeah, that's absolutely right. When I first got in touch with you, this had been my niche for a while since I'd qualified. I qualified 2016, mm-hmm. So I'd already been doing it for a number of years. And the niche was so clear to me from really whilst I was training. And this is because I had been working already for a number of years with LGBTQ charities, mm-hmm. Doing youth work and events work and other things in the community, mentoring and stuff with LGBTQ people. Mm-hmm. I was really confident and felt very maybe not confident. I was really excited by this kind of work, and it felt like it really suited me. So maybe my confidence was a little bit stronger in this area rather than working with the generic population. I felt like because of my own experience, my own lived experience of being queer myself, I wanted to share that and to give that to the counselling world too. Having worked in it for so long, my counsellor friends on my course were when I told them about the fact that, I was going to set up an LGBTQ specialist private practice. This was going to be my niche. I don't know if I was necessarily using that word as such, but I was like, that's going to be my audience. My counsellor friends were like, really? Are you sure you're going to get enough work? Is there going to be enough people? And I was like, we're in Brighton. Definitely going to get enough people. But even still, there's so many queer folks out there that are looking for a queer counsellor or someone who gets it, really. And I just said to them, the thing is that if you work with everyone, then you kind of work with no one, because it's bland. And well, maybe didn't quite put it in those words, but I think that's what I was thinking, because my friends were just like, I don't know if I really want to nail down that much. I want to work with everybody. I feel like that's just be more open. But then I think with time, it really showed really how having a niche, for me anyway, I felt like it was. I was going to use the word easy. It certainly wasn't easy, but easier, clearer to attract clients, because I knew who my audience was. Therefore, I knew what to put out on social media. I knew what to write in blogs. I wasn't just writing random generic things and ticking all the boxes on profile So it's just, it made sense to me.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the sort of things that we did together was we looked a bit at your website, didn't we? Because one of the things you've done is you've sort of really developed a lot of resources on your website as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think often, we've referred people to your website when they're looking for help, because you've got like a fantastic set of resources on there for people to do with LGBTQ issues, haven't you? So it's something you've really developed, I think.
Yeah, and at that point when I first got in touch with you, I think I was sort of swimming in ideas. I had lots of things going on. I had lots of like blogs and resources and things that I was developing, trying to do some training on my own, trying to do some training for other organisations. And this was really, I think I actually we worked together first in 2020, but I think I first got in touch with you before I relocated to Scotland, so pre-pandemic 2019. So doing trainings online was something that was less heard of. So I was kind of trying to shout like, this is going to work, we're going to be able to do this training online, we can do it on video. So I had that kind of struggle too. But it was swimming in all of these ideas and all of these things that I wanted to do and was trying to do. And really when we met, I felt like we could actually make a clearer plan about actually what do I want to focus on, where do I want to go, and how can I make my offer and what I want to give clients, what I want to give fellow counsellors much clearer.
Yeah.
Because I just had, and my website was quite messy. I mean, it still is a little bit because there's lots of things on, but kind of just trying to make that clearer, make me feel more confident about what I was offering, really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to circle back a little bit before we move on, because I think there's this great misconception that a lot of people have that if you're working with LGBTQ people, it's just going to be about LGBTQ issues, sort of like coming out or I don't know what people think might be the problems of the LGBT community. But the fact is when you're working with LGBTQ people, is you're working with a whole range of issues, aren't you? It's not just about being LGBTQ.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall I say a little bit more about that then?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So I think that might be something that my counsellor friends maybe thought too, and maybe they thought, and some people I think when they're worried about a niche, like, it might get a bit boring, talking about the same thing. I think if I was only talking about coming out all the time, then of course anything's going to get dull, although it would be different for different people. I certainly don't just work with coming out. So when clients come to me, usually it's because they want to work with someone who's also queer and who also has lots of experience working with queer clients. And sometimes I have clients that are coming to me specifically because they really want to focus on coming to terms with their gender or their sexuality. And we dive deep into that, and that is like the main focus right from the start, and that kind of continues to be that. For other people, lots and lots of other people, they just want to make sure that they are not going to be misunderstood, and they want to be accepted, and they want to make sure that they work with a counsellor who gets it.
Yeah.
So, for example, they might have a same-sex partner and they might want to mention them every so often, but the actual thing that they're coming from might be a bereavement, or it might be work stress, for example. But they don't want to worry about the fact of, what if I mention that? Or what if I mention the fact that I'm trans? Or what if my counsellor thinks I might be trans when I join on video call? And what do I feel like I need to explain that? And also I think what's really important to think about is people talk about the trans broken arm, I think is the phrase.
Oh yeah,
so
the trans broken arm syndrome, yeah.
Yeah, that syndrome. So it's like that sometimes I've heard clients say that, they go to a counsellor and they're trans, and then the counsellor automatically thinks that the reason that they're coming to counselling is about their gender, and that everything's going to stem back to their gender. When sometimes, yes, of course it's part of the picture, but it's not almost always not the direct reason. It's actually usually the society around us that we're working in, and that's what makes it really difficult to be trans, and that's the challenges that is really important that their counsellor gets, which is part of everything else they're talking about.
Because I think there's this huge sort of misunderstanding, I think, about the transgender community, that somehow it's a problem Whereas in actual fact, when trans people are out and they're living as their true selves, they're actually really, that's not the problem at all, is it?
Yeah.
just to touch on that, really. And I think, one of the things that we've sort of, really bonded over, isn't it, is that some of your work actually has been about educating counsellors and therapists on the importance of pronouns, and that was a big part of your work, sort of back in the early days, wasn't it? Was working on helping people to understand the importance of pronouns.
Yeah, that actually was a big part of my work. I was really trying to shout from the rooftops and do lots of training, do sorts of really introductory basic trainings that were attracting big audiences, lots of people, rather than having long and complicated courses, which of course are great, but they're not going to attract counsellors who are maybe unsure and a bit scared to ask these questions and don't really know whether they're really eligible or want to kind of do a longer training. So I was trying to offer something that was really accessible to get people thinking about the basics and thinking about their own gender and thinking about their own privileges. And one of the big things I was trying to put out there is, what about asking our clients their pronouns? Do we ask our clients their pronouns? And if you don't, why not? Why not? And I remember often in my trainings sharing examples of how a counsellor friend of mine had told me that they had started working with a client who was trans, and they checked with them what their pronouns at the beginning, and then carried on. And I was like, okay, that's interesting and great, but do you ask your other clients their pronouns? Oh, no. And I was like, oh, why not? Because we don't know, do we? We don't know until we check. So this is something that I think is a really helpful thing to, I find, helping counsellors to think about, why are we asking our clients pronouns, or why are we not asking our clients their pronouns? And also, if we don't know our clients' pronouns, what pronouns are we using in supervision? Yeah, because I'd often get that answer back from counsellors, I don't need to know their pronouns, I'm not talking in third person, I would never need to use their pronouns. But we are in supervision. I think some counsellors maybe thought, well, the client can't hear me. Oh, big mistake. Because of course, as you and I both know, and lots of people listening know, that it's so important to get people's pronouns right, and names, whether they're trans or not, if they're in the room or not in the room.
It's I
can hear myself really getting fired up about it to talk about that. But I think that things have really shifted big time in the last few years, and I like to think that I've been a part of that journey in seeing, especially in the counselling community, seeing that it's way more common for counsellors to have their pronouns on their Zoom names and on their email signature. That when I first started doing that kind of advocacy work, it was mostly just queer counsellors who were putting their pronouns on their email signatures. And now loads of cis counsellors are. In fact, it's probably more than 50%. I'm seeing when I go onto trainings and I'm like, wow, look at all of these people putting their pronouns out. Not saying that they have to put their pronouns out, because making it mandatory is not great either. So it's just kind of thinking about whether or not you would want to, and if you have that privilege, why not?
Yeah, I think what you said is so important though, about the idea of not misgendering people in supervision, because as the mum of trans daughters, as you know, that was actually a big step for me in acknowledging and accepting who they were, was not to misgender them. And even if I'm because obviously I still make mistakes with misgendering them, it just sometimes, especially when I'm talking about them when they were little, I'll revert to their original pronouns. And I always correct myself now, because it feels like that is, ultimately it's about respect, isn't it? It's about respecting somebody's understanding and identity, and that is important. And I think as well, it actually trains your brain too, that if we call them something wrong in supervision, then it might, there's something going on for us there, and I think that's a really important thing to actually investigate, isn't it? And I think, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think so many of us have got internalised transphobia without even realising. it's really important to think about. And I think especially if you're working, well, I mean, I was going to say especially if you're working with the LGBT community, but often you don't know that you are, do you? And you don't know who you might, you might be talking to a client and they might have a transgender person in their lives. So
exactly, or they might be trans themselves and they just haven't told you yet, or maybe will never tell you. I have so many clients that come to me and say, have you had counselling before? And they're like, yes, but I wasn't able to talk about gender. It didn't feel possible. Didn't feel, maybe they only had 6 sessions, or maybe the counsellor that they were working with, they just weren't sure. There was nothing on their profiles or anything in the information about the fact that they might get it, so they just tried to avoid mentioning it and thinking about something else because it just felt too vulnerable. And that's really sad, really. So I would encourage counsellors listening to this, if you do feel comfortable and get it, hopefully, and you're very accepting of trans people, tell your clients, tell them in your publicity. Make sure that that's really clear, because you could be attracting clients that are wanting to talk about these things, but they're too scared. They just don't know, and there's not really enough of us out there that are talking about it and being open about the fact that we are or trying to be as safe a place as possible.
I agree. And I think the thing to remember as well is that when you look at the number of people, sort of like Gen Z, the younger people who are identifying as, somewhere within sort of on the rainbow spectrum, that's a really high proportion of young people now. I think it's something like 48% even, it's up to half of them have. It is just part of the culture now, isn't it? And despite people trying to stamp on it and stamp it out, that is their generation. And those are often the people who also feel comfortable about coming for counselling. I think so people of my generation and older are a bit sort of, not sure I need therapy. But younger people, it's just like, have some counselling. I think they're very much more open to it. And I think, from a marketing perspective, it's actually a really good move. Do you ever get people, during the training who said, I'm worried about, putting people off if I give my pronouns or ask them their pronouns? Was that something that, you'd used to talk about?
Yes, definitely. That came up. Some people would say things like, what if people don't understand what a pronoun is? And I remember a long time ago me thinking that too, and thinking, what's a pronoun? Kind of going back to English and thinking, what's a verb, what's an adverb, all these words. I don't know what they are, and for some people that will be the case, that they might not remember what it is. And when I've asked people to thinking about whether or not they want to share their pronouns, on their badge, for example, if they've been in person training, that some people, if I haven't been clear in the early days of what that was and what that means, before we started the training, I did have people writing Mrs. and just being confused and thinking it meant title. And I was thinking, that's so interesting. Yeah. That's really helpful to know that that's kind of, there's been some confusion there. So then I started being much more clear and kind of explaining before they even wrote on the badges, and also making it optional. Yeah,
well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, just that sort of understanding of what it means. Yeah.
Some people were scared to ask. Some people were scared to ask their clients about pronouns because they were like, well, I work with the generic population, so there's such a tiny number of people that it would affect. So it just seems a bit of a strange question to ask, and I don't want to make the client uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So then I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting, because then we're putting the people who are in the privileged position, who have what I would say is called pronoun privilege, where their pronouns match how they look and sound, and they're usually cisgender. So most of us would be in that kind of that place.
Yeah.
And then our clients would be, those clients are privileged, so they're not, how are they going to feel uncomfortable? They're going to feel uncomfortable because there's some transphobia or some kind of intolerance going on there. And actually asking them is helping break that down. And it's way more common in young, like you were saying before about Gen Z, it's way more common in young people's services to kind of be automatically asking pronouns, and cis and trans clients are like totally fine with answering that. But in our counselling world, as those people are growing up into adults, that's only going to become more and more important. Anyway, I could go on about this for days. So what's your next question?
So that was something that you sort of moved into sort of training counsellors in, wasn't it? So I think if we just wind back a little bit as well, because part of the problem I think that you had initially, well, not problem, but I think one of the issues was that you needed to make space for actually being able to fit in developing this side of your business. And so one of the first things pieces of work we did together was actually thinking about your pricing, wasn't it? Because tell us, how many clients would you see in a week? What's full for you in terms of your client numbers?
What, now or in the early days, or both?
Yeah, I mean, do both.
So when I first contacted you, I don't know, I was probably seeing at a max probably something like 16. For me, that felt really big. I know lots of people listening might feel like that's totally fine, but for me that was like, whew, that's a lot of people to hold, seeing them every single week. And what you really helped me to do is to work out, look, what times am I seeing these people? And they were a little bit scattered, really, because I had started working online and I also had my own room, therefore I didn't have the restrictions of when to book people in, so I could be more flexible, but maybe too flexible. So it was becoming really tiring, kind of having people sort of all over the place in my diary. I was strict and boundaries in the sense of not doing weekends, but I did lots of evenings. And that was horrible, really. It was so tiring, so difficult to keep up with. So working together with you and thinking about, how many clients do I currently see and how many do I want to see? And it was so clear, and I mean, it's obvious now if I think about it, but you helped me to realise that the biggest thing I need to change is my pricing, because in order to see less people, I'm going to need to put my prices up. Now, back in those days, I was quite notorious for doing lots of concessionaries, having sliding scales. That was very complicated as well. Free initial sessions, which all those things are, for some people, might work well. I know there's always debates about those things. But for me, it got to the point where actually this is really hard. Like, I am working with so many people, so much high risk. And really, at the end of the day, my salary is so little. By the time you think about all the other overheads you've got to cover, you think, oh, this is a lot per hour, but it's not. It's not really. So now I've got a very small number of clients. I would probably work with a maximum of six. And that is because I'm working a 4-day week and having a huge amount of space that I'm putting into my other training, the email counselling training work, which I know we're going to talk about later. I've reduced my client load down, and I'm also going to be doing supervision and other things as well. So I'm trying to keep it lower for that reason. But it had been reducing because I was able to put my fees up and have more space for other things. When
you're in demand, you can begin to charge more because you know that there's going to be people who will really, really want to work with you. And I think because you had such a clear niche, you knew who your clients were and you did have people who wanted to work with you, that does enable you to put up your prices. But how did it feel for you when you first sort of started thinking about, I'm going to raise, because we did raise them quite a lot, didn't we? I think it might have been 2 or 3 goes, but you got to quite a high level, didn't you, in terms of your prices? So how was it for you, sort of like that, I'm going to raise my prices?
It was so scary. I mean, I'm going to be real here. And I remember when we first talked about it, and you were really confident and like, it's gonna, this is going fine. This makes sense, because I was telling you, I've got people waiting. I keep getting counsellors are referring to me. I'm getting more known. Clients, more and more clients are wanting to work with me, but I can't fit them in, and I don't want to keep squeezing them in. With a waiting list and having to turn people away, and then for you to say, why don't you put your prices up? And actually my supervisor's saying the same. And I was like, okay, yes, maybe I need to be doing this. So my prices were really low. And then I was like, I could put them up a little bit. I had to do it in stages.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's ethical too, but I had to for me to feel confident and comfortable with that. There's no point in just, whacking on a number, and because if you don't feel right with it's going to affect the work.
Yeah, and I think it actually affects your ability to be able to recruit people as well, because you just don't have that belief that people are going to work with you at that price.
Yeah, you think you're not going to get anybody, and therefore you probably won't, because it all feels really awkward. Like, oh God, I'm not worth that. Yeah. But so slowly putting it up, little by little, and slowly, and then for new people, and that's a whole nother complicated issue I worked on with my supervisor around what to do with current clients and how to kind of very slowly rise their prices. And but over time, people don't stay forever. They leave, and then you have new people coming through, and then it gets easier because then people are starting on the newer rates. And I feel now, after all the work that we've done together, really comfortable and confident talking about pricing, which I never ever thought I would get to that stage. Like, that would be the last thing I think with having coaching I would have thought that I would be more confident on. Yeah. And I think that I would love to talk about that with supervisees and things. I think it feels like a really important part of our job.
I think it
really
is really big,
and
I think I just think it's traditional in the counselling world that we don't charge a lot. We tend to undercharge. I mean, I could start talking about this forever, so let's move on. Because I think the thing is with the pricing, that freed up a lot of time for you. Mm-hmm. And then the other way that you've sort of been working is with your email counselling, because that frees up time for you in another sort of way. And I think people would be really curious to find out, what is email counselling and how do you do it?
So firstly, email counselling does free up my time. It doesn't free up, it gives me flexibility. Yeah. So because of the way that email counselling works, I don't have to have set session times when I work with email clients. And that has given me so much flexibility in my working week to be able to develop other things. Yeah. And it's also something that not many counsellors are able to offer. So, lots of clients are wanting it because there's very few places to go for it. So what email counselling is it's basically a secure, confidential, therapeutic email exchange with a qualified counsellor. That's it in a nutshell. It's very different from traditional counselling in person or even on video call, which is quite similar to in person, in the fact that we can't see or hear each other. That is a huge difference. It's all text-based, of course. It's emails, it's written, and it's asynchronous. So you're not meeting in the moment. So you haven't got that dialogue backwards and forwards. You've got the email that they send and then my reply. Don't get me wrong though, it's not like we just sort of randomly send emails. And I think that sometimes when counsellors particularly hear about email counselling, they might assume, oh, that sounds a bit messy, a bit unboundaried. I don't know if I could do that. And then some people might sort of unethically try and do it with clients without having done any training and get themselves into some very choppy waters, because it can get very messy if you've not really thought through the boundaries. The boundaries are really important. So what I mean by that is I teach the students that come on my courses the importance of having a word limit. So or else the clients could just literally write pages and pages, could write a whole book if they wanted. They could write several emails to you, and it's like, that's going to be unmanageable. Yeah,
because you've got to read it. Yeah. Let me just get this straight. So they would send you an email and you would spend time reading it, and that time you spend reading it is part of their sort of therapeutic hour. Is that the case?
So basically they send me an email with a word limit on a set day that we've agreed, set day and time. There's sort of like a deadline, or I might not use that word, but that they send it by. So they've got a time that they send it by. And then once I've received it, I put some time in my diary to read, draft and send and write a reply. And that process from when they send their email to me sending my reply is 2 working days later. Right. Because it's really important, the way that email counselling works is that there is space between it, that they've sent their words, and then I've got that space to look at it and reflect on that, and then have a quick check of it just before I send it.
Yeah, because I imagine that the difficult thing is often if something's text-based is the ease with which misunderstandings can happen.
Yeah.
Do you find that comes up, or do you find because you've got that reflective time?
Not as often with clients as you would think, but it is something that fellow counsellors do worry about. Think that what if I can't see them, then there's going to be misunderstandings, there's going to be ruptures. But it yes, of course it can happen. We can misunderstand each other around the tone, and I think it's really important that's why I think training is really important, because if we're just randomly sending emails to our clients and not thinking about how we might do that and how we might work on the text, the thing that we're writing back to them, in a way that's going to be very clear and is going to try to avoid misunderstandings and be aware of the fact that there might be something, like saying something like, for example, I'm not sure if this makes sense, or maybe you might disagree, like kind of putting words in like that, for example. That would be kind of one of my things that I might teach people, to kind of thinking about how they minimise misunderstandings.
Yeah, sort of making it conditional in a sense. This may be or it may not be, but just sort of giving people that room. Which
I do already. I do it already when I'm working with clients video call. Maybe that's just habit, but I feel like that's really helpful. I might think to myself, I've got something really challenging we're going to say in a video call, and definitely if it was in an email, I'd be like, oh, this is coming to my mind, and this kind of comes up with people when I think about this, and I don't know if it really applies to you, might not at all. And then sometimes they're like, oh, absolutely. Yeah. And other times they're like, oh, no. And then they can say no, because you haven't kind of put it on like, this is my interpretation, and this is what so I think it's a really good practice to have in all of our counselling work, really. And I found that technique to work really well.
You mentioned that you actually offer this email counselling training, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. But what gave you the idea to develop this? Because you're working sort of like with LGBTQ people, of the pronouns work, and then you've sort of like used email counselling. Tell me a bit more about how you developed it.
Oh, that's a great question, because it's quite a pivot, isn't it? Well, I had been working loads with clients, queer clients, by using email counselling, and it was working really, really well. I was really enjoying that freedom and flexibility it was giving me and giving my clients. Yeah. And I think it's one of the things that came up in our coaching work we did together, really. But I looked at it, and then I kind of came back to it later down the line.
You had a blog, didn't you, about email counselling? Because you did it for your clients, so your clients would know about it. And then every now and then I started referring people, well, go and look at Chloe's blog on email counselling. And then in the end, I sort of said to you, Chloe, have you thought about sort of making this into a book or something? Or there was something around that, wasn't there?
Yeah. And I was like, a book? I can't write a book.
Go on, tell us about your book.
Yeah, so that was really scary, and I was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, I don't know if I've got enough to say. And you were like, you've got loads to say. Think how many years you've been doing this, how many clients you've worked with, how many counsellors that approached you about this. And I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, I suppose. And I think it was just the word book that felt really scary. Like, blogs is okay. I was like, I can put my blogs out. And I was like, actually, I've probably got like so many things I could write about in blogs. Maybe it would be clearer and nicer to put it together into a book. So I did bring in that task, and but then I kept kind of, it took me a while to write, because I think I was scared of launching it. I was scared of putting it out there and like, oh, no one buys it, and what if people think it's rubbish? And that kind of, it was the confidence to actually start writing it was hard enough, but then the confidence to launch it was scary. Yeah. But then I did launch it. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is hard, isn't it? All those different stages. And it actually doesn't get any easier, does it? You still, like you say, it was fearful to start it, and you still feel fear to actually launch it. And then what happened when you did launch it?
Well, then people read it, and people got in touch with me and were saying, how can I learn more?
Yeah.
Where can I go for training? Because people
Yeah.
were like, this sounds great. I want to work with clients and I want to know more. But this, the ebook is a taster. It's not teaching people everything about what they need to know. It was me sharing my experiences and sort of stuff about how email counselling works. But it's not a training. And people were like, I want to do a training in this. Mm-hmm. Where can I go? And I was like, thinking, well, there isn't really anywhere. Like there's a few places that offer online, generic online training, and most of those that have been sort of around since pre-pandemic do teach a little bit about email counselling, but it's usually as a sort of an add-on. Yeah, and the video counselling's like the main thing. Yeah. And there wasn't anything that was. And to my knowledge, still isn't anything that's specifically aimed at email counselling. And at this stage, everyone was working on video call anyway. It's like, I don't want to do a generic online course. I want to learn.
Don't need it.
I don't need it. I want to learn about this text-based stuff, about email counselling specifically. So we talked again, and you were like, why don't you do a course yourself? And I was like,
well, you are good at doing teaching,
Yeah, and I was like,
just sort of say.
Yeah, and then I was like, that feels really, I put myself out, that's really scary to do. But you reminded me, which I needed reminding, I think, at that point, that I had done lots of training. Yeah. I'd been doing it for years already. All of the LGBTQ stuff, I'd already been working with counsellors, and all of the stuff that we've been speaking about. I'd done loads of trainings. I've done teaching and training in most of my jobs pre being a counsellor.
Yeah,
it's absolutely something that I actually love doing. But there was something about that. I feel like, that's a big step because it's something new and nobody's doing it. And I think you said something like, yeah, but that's the very reason to do it if nobody's doing it. Yeah, people are needing it. People want it. Yeah. And you love doing it. So why not offer that?
Yeah.
So I put something together, short course, and I got a live course where people come along, and it was so popular and it sold out so quickly.
Yeah.
And it went really well. I absolutely loved doing it and got brilliant feedback. So I ran it again, but then it sold out again. And then I was getting more and more people joining my waiting list, waiting for the next time I was going to run the live course. And I was like, I can't keep up with this. How often am I going to do it? And also, is it going to get boring for me to keep teaching the same thing? I thought, this isn't going to work. This isn't going. I'm not going to be able to reach as many people that I want to. So that's when I started to think about recorded training and sort of that people can access on their own, self-paced type training. And that's what I've been developing more recently. And I'm really excited to be doing my first official launch in the autumn of 2024.
Yeah.
But I've been doing loads of tests, like beta tests and pilots with counsellors over the last year or so. So there's been...
you've done the live trainings. So
yeah, they've done the live trainings.
You know what works and
But also the recorded course has gone out to a small number of counsellors who've tested it and tried it. So and I've made so many changes. So it's been a huge process, and I'm still kind of in that of kind of developing it and making it better. But my hope is that this will mean that I can reach more counsellors and in turn reach more clients, because I can't work with everyone all clients who want email counselling.
Yeah.
Even if I was working with a huge number of clients, so more counsellors being trained, more clients will be able to access this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it feels exciting.
Really exciting. I can imagine in this day and age as well, that sort of ability, the flexibility for people just to be able to email in their own time, and also for people who perhaps, in some ways find it easier to maybe, write things down and think about things that way rather than being in the moment where they have to suddenly start talking about something that maybe are quite difficult for them, that somehow being able to write it down and send it sort of introduces sort of there's something around it that feels as though it might be safer for people in some ways.
Yeah.
Or particular types of people might find it a safer way of working.
Yeah, definitely. I've worked with so many clients who they may work by email counselling who may never have had counselling if that hadn't been an option. They've either been too embarrassed, too nervous, and they might never have got to what they really want to talk about.
Wow.
You know, the kind of, if you think about the door handle moment,
Yeah.
and the people kind of bringing something up in the last sort of few minutes of a session. With email counselling, it's much more common for clients to be able to actually address in their whole session what do they want to talk about, and not kind of beating around the bush and just being like, oh, talking about lots of other things and how was my day, and then just like finally getting to this is the crux of what I need the support with.
Yeah.
Because there's the disinhibition is lower, they feel less scared, more comfortable, and because they're writing it down, they can think about it, they can see it written before they decide to click send, or they can delete it and think, okay, maybe I'll say that next week. They don't have to, but once it's out, when you've said it out loud, it's out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is really helpful for clients, but it's also helpful for us as counsellors, because there's so many times, and people listening might be feel the same, where if I work with clients like on video call or in person, I'm thinking to myself, I want to say something, but I'm not quite sure if I'm ready. I'm trying to process it in my head, but I'm also trying to listen to what they're saying. And also sometimes, just mid-sentence, I'm just like, what was the word I was going to say? And that's really scary. And I can't think what the word, I just say to clients, what's the word? And it's just annoying, because it just like uses up time, but it's just like, when your head just freezes. But when you're working with email counselling, as a counsellor, you can really think and process and, get and just sort of have that pause, have that silence, where you're not having to continue listening to what they're saying, plus kind of working out what you might want to say, which is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
It works both ways, I think, for the clients and for us.
Yeah, so we can expect your email counselling training to be out in the autumn, can we?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how can people find out more about it? Because I'm sure people listening will want to know more about it.
So I've got a brand new website, because I used to have it as like a tab on my original website, and that was getting really messy and confusing. So I've set up brand new website, emailcounsellingacademy.com. Mm-hmm. So it's very clear, because it's based and aimed at counsellors. So on that website, you'll find more information about the courses I offer. Mm-hmm. And how to get in touch and how to sign up. So there's a waiting list on there at the moment. So if you're interested in being alerted when the spaces get released in the autumn, then the best thing to do is to pop your name on there. And I will let you know. So
I'll pop the link into the show notes as well. So Chloe, thanks so much for coming on the interview and telling us all about all the things we've talked about. I'm sure people will have been really interested to learn a bit more about the whole thing about pronouns, and also just opening up their minds in terms of how they could develop a different way of counselling people, and perhaps bring that flexibility that might suit both them and their clients. And I do know people who've worked with Chloe and have given me great feedback about their email counselling training. And I'm sure that if you did decide to work with Chloe, either in supervision or with their email counselling training, that you'd really benefit from it. And Chloe, it's always, always, always a pleasure to see you. You are so great at just implementing stuff. And I think you've been really courageous. And I think this is why you are where you are at today, and I think this is just the start. I think we're going to see you going on.
Wow.
And doing more. And, yeah, I know.
That's lovely words. Thank you,
you,
Josephine. And you have helped me a lot along the way. And I know I've said this to you many, many times, but I think that having people around you to support you, having coaching, having supervisors, having colleagues, we can't do it on our own. And that's so great. It's so lovely, and really appreciate all the support you've done along the way, along the years.
As I say, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I just love watching my coachees just sort of go,
take the next scary step, and I'm just like, surely there can't be something else even more scary. I just start to settle, and then I'm like, and then I get an idea. And then you're like, go for it. And I'm like, and then I always end up doing it. I'm like, why? And then I'm fine.
Yeah, that's it. Once you've actually
people
done
listening,
it.
I just hope that you can find that courage within you. I know that's what you're all about, Josephine, but that's it's so lovely, I think, to see fellow counsellors taking that dive, taking those scary steps.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually that scary once you do it. I mean, that's always that's a famous quote, isn't it? That you can do it.
Yeah, it feels really scary, but the scariness never really goes away. But you just sort of...
It's still scary, but it's just a bit more like I'm doing it.
But I think the other thing, just to say in closing, is I think it's really lovely to see a counsellor developing this side of their work, because I think, coaches, it's a bit like you said, you could see prior to the pandemic this huge possibility of online training, and coaches could see it at that point. And I was involved with coaches, that's how I started. And the coaching community is doing this, and the counselling community haven't been doing it. And I think pre-pandemic we're beginning to catch up now, and I really want to see more counsellors doing this, because I think we have got so much to offer. We've got that depth of experience of working with people therapeutically. Coaches are slightly different, they've got a different line of work, but I think we've got so much that we can offer people in terms of that sort of therapeutic knowledge and the depth of what we have to do. And I think it's a shame that we're just letting coaches take up that space, because I think we need to claim that space for counsellors as well. That's my little sermon for the day.
I absolutely agree with you, and I'll just squeeze in this bit. I don't know if it's helpful to use, but just to say that, I think that counsellors sadly can be scared of change, which is a bit ironic, really, because that's kind of what we're all about. And there's so many counsellors that are fearful to try something new. And that pre-pandemic there was so many counsellors that were like, I would never go on video call, no way, that's not the real thing, and that's not going to work. And it was quite stigmatised in the community. And then what I say to people is, look how that shifted. And look how now everybody, I mean, it's very, very unusual to find a counsellor who doesn't work on video call, or at least offer it as an option, right? And I always say, I really hope it doesn't take a pandemic for email counselling to also kind of surge and become bigger, because it did overnight with video call, and it will with email counselling, it certainly will. But it will take a little bit of time, I think, for that stigma to reduce, and the kind of wondering and questioning and this fear of change in the counselling community. With clients, it's already there. Clients are like, give me something that's really accessible, that I don't have to worry about setting a set time, and I can write, great. And that's going to grow that kind of that need in the counsellors, in the clients, but counsellors, we need to listen to that and be more ready to, like, how can we make our spaces more accessible, more flexible for both clients and for us.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. That's such a brilliant ending. Thank you. So we'll finish there. Thank you, Chloe.
Anyway,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.